Hey guys, it's Lucas. Today I'm going to walk you through my process on how I pasteurize straw and inoculate it with blue oyster mushroom spawn. I recommend for you first time mushroom growers out there that you try to use blue oyster or some type of oyster species because they're one of the most aggressive species you can grow, and you'll have less chance of contamination. And that's why I just pasteurize the straw. There's no need for me to be completely sterile. As long as I wash my hands, keep a clean environment, it should be all it needs. So you're gonna need to get yourself some straw. I use this brand here, Easy Straw, because it's pre-chopped and there's no chemicals or anything in it, no additives. You know, some of the other straws you see will have some tack in it, and you don't want that. You just want 100% straw. So the first step is we're just gonna take the straw and we're gonna wanna heat it to 180 degrees in some water to pasteurize it. There's a few different ways to pasteurize your straw, but this is the way I like to do it because I do it on a small scale. I'm not doing it for commercial purposes. I'm just doing it for my own use and enough to stock the tent. So this right here will probably make me a good 6-7 bags or whatever container I decide to use. For this, I'm gonna use a mixture of bags and containers just because I want to show you a couple different ways to do it. So we're just gonna fill up our large container to put on our stove with the straw, and then we're gonna fill the container with water. Stuff is a little dusty, so try not to breathe it in. All right, that looks good. Now we're gonna bring it upstairs. We're gonna fill it with water and put it on the stove. Okay, so I filled my pot with water to about here. And now what I want to do is I want to weigh down the straw so it's completely submerged. So I'm just going to use a couple plates to do that. Plates on like that, and then we just push it down so that the straw is completely submerged in water. Then we're going to turn the stove on high, cover it, and over the next 20 minutes I'll keep checking the temperature of the water just with a basic meat thermometer like this. What I want to do is once the water gets to 180 degrees, I'm going to shut it off and I'm going to let it sit covered for roughly 2 hours. All right, so I'm gonna let this cook and I'll check back when it gets up to temp. So while the straw is upstairs heating up on the stove, I'm gonna prepare one of my containers. I save a lot of larger containers for growing mushrooms in. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna drill holes in it. Probably gonna do about 10 holes, about 4 inches apart or so. And then we want to do some smaller holes in the bottom so that it can drain, because we're going to be stuffing this with a mixture of wet straw and mushroom spawn. And part of the process after we fill these is going to let them drain and incubate for 3 weeks before we put them in the grow tent. I'm going to use a 1/4 inch drill bit for the sides, and then I'll use something smaller like an 1/8 inch drill bit in the bottom for it to drain. And do a nice diamond pattern. All right, so did my holes. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, only 7 holes, and that's perfect because we don't need too many holes. The mushrooms will just grow bigger clusters with the less holes you have. And now I'm just going to drill some holes in the bottom here so that it can drain. That should be just fine. I washed this container a while ago, but I'm gonna wanna sanitize it really quick before I stuff it full of straw and mushroom spawn. So just gonna wipe it out with a simple bleach and water solution and then rinse it really well after I do that so there's no residue of bleach left inside the container. Okay, so it took about 30 minutes of heating on high for the water and straw to reach a temperature of 180 degrees. Gonna want to check a couple spots to make sure the temperature is roughly the same in each area. Looks good to me. Now what we're gonna do, we're just gonna put the top back on and turn the heat off, and we're gonna let it sit for roughly 2 hours like this, and that'll be enough to pasteurize the straw. Then the next step in the process is going to be to drain the straw and let it cool off. Okay, so it's been about an hour and a half since I turned off the heat and let the straw and water sit covered. Now I want to clear some space so I can make some dinner. So I'm not going to let it sit the full 2 hours, but it's not going to be a problem. We're going to take these plates out. They're going to be a little hot, so be careful. The straw is still very hot. So I have this tub right here. It's a good size for dumping the strained straw into to cool off. If you don't have something like this, you could just wipe down like a plastic table or a tarp, and as long as it's a clean surface that you've wiped down with some kind of bleach solution, it should be fine. Alright, so we're just going to let it drain off as much as we can before we throw it into the bin, and then we're going to have to let this cool off until you no longer feel heat when you touch it. Probably 30 to 45 minutes or so. You want to drain off as much water as you can so that it's not sitting in a big pool of water. Okay, so I have my straw strained and in my bin, and I'm going to bring this down to the basement to cool off, and I'm going to periodically come down and move the straw around with clean hands. I'm going to wash my hands first, then come down and move it around, because there's going to be some hot pockets all over here, and you got to open it up, move it around so it can cool off evenly. You don't want to put your spawn in until this is cooled down, because you'll end up cooking your spawn and you won't grow any mushrooms. I'm gonna have to air out the kitchen now because my daughter doesn't really like the smell of the straw tea that you basically make when you do this. Definitely gives the house a unique smell. I don't mind it. Alright, let's bring this down to the basement to cool off. Alright, so it's been about 45 minutes since I took the straw out and let it cool. I had to move it around like this, probably like 5 times, to make sure there's no pockets of heat left and that all the straw is evenly cooled down. And now we're going to add some of our blue oyster grain spawn to the. Alright, so I have my blue oyster spawn. I usually buy from some reputable spawn producers in the Northeast area, like Fungi Ally. This is from Cap and Stem and Field and Forest, to name a few. I'll list a bunch of them in the description below for you to check out. Even though it's summer, I'm still using blue oyster spawn. It's because it's what I'm used to using. I probably could have experimented with pink oyster spawn because it likes the temperature to be a little hotter. But in my basement, it stays relatively cool, so I feel like by the time these are ready to fruit, the temperature in my basement will be in that 70 to 75 degree range pretty regularly. All right. I'm going to break up the spawn, and because I do this at home and not on a commercial level, I'm not worried about getting as much bang for my buck with my spawn, and I'm going to be very generous with the amount of spawn I was using. If I was doing it commercially and trying to make money off of this, I'd be a little more careful about the amount of spawn I'm using, but since I'm not, it's okay to just use a lot. I feel like the more the merrier. All right, that looks like a good amount of spawn added to my straw here. I'm gonna want to break up any pieces like that. I believe that the grain they use on this is millet, so that's why there are these little round pieces. But yeah, we're gonna break up all of the round pieces, and then we're just gonna mix it up really well with clean hands. This is why growing blue oysters is great for beginners, because a lot of other species of mushrooms require you to have a very sterile environment. And blue oysters, because they're so aggressive, they're one of the very few species that you can grow on straw this way. I've heard you can also grow chestnut mushrooms this way. I've tried it, but I've been unsuccessful so far. So I'd recommend, if you want to start growing mushrooms for your first time, stick with an oyster species. All right. Next step is we're going to start filling up our containers. I have my amazing grass protein and kale container right here, and we're going to fill this up. A lot of growers like to use 5-gallon buckets. As long as it's food grade plastic, then you're good to go. All right, just going to start stuffing this in here. You want to pack it down really nice and tight. Leave a little room at the top. You don't have to, because the mycelium might want a little bit of room to grow, but not much. And then we just close it up like so. After we're done filling our containers, we're going to stick it on something to allow it to drain. I like to use these trays with the grooves right here, so that it doesn't sit in a puddle as it drains. You can experiment with a variety of different containers to grow mushrooms out of. I've used yogurt containers, I've used my protein containers, I've used 5-gallon buckets, and I've used Ziploc bags. And I wish I had some gallon Ziploc bags, but I don't right now. So I'm just gonna stuff some of these quart-size Ziploc bags, poke some holes in it so it can drain, and it'll be just fine. I don't bother sterilizing these bags at all. I think they come clean enough. Just stuff it in there as best as we can, and we pack it down just like we did in the container. Try not to rip the zipper. Just down nice and tight. And then we're going to give it a zip. It's good. And to allow drainage, what we're going to do, we're just going to poke a couple holes in the bottom. Plus we're going to poke a couple around the bag as well, just to let the mycelium breathe a little bit. All right, Got a lot of straw left. I'm gonna pack up another 4 or 5 bags, and then we're going to let it sit in this tray for about 3 to 4 weeks. And then by then, we'll check, see if it's covered with mycelium. And then at that point, it'll be ready to fruit, and we put it in the tent and introduce it to high humidity. When it's incubating, it just needs to be at a consistent temperature, like around 70 degrees. Because I like experimenting with different types of containers to grow mushrooms in, I'm gonna try using a mason jar because, hey, my channel is called Lucas and his Mason Jar, so I gotta try it. What I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna stuff it in as best as I can, and then I'll allow it to drain with this sprouting lid that I use for making sprouts and starting some of my microgreens with. I want to encourage you guys to just experiment like crazy when you're growing mushrooms and you start to get a little more comfortable. I mean, I've seen some people use some pretty low-tech stuff. I've seen people use plastic shopping bags, cardboard box. The oyster mushroom strain is definitely the strain to experiment with. You can grow them on a lot of different substrates, and you can grow them in a lot of different containers. All right, and then this guy we'll just leave upside down to drain for now. Next, we're going to want to write the date and the species of mushroom on each bag. So we're just going to write BO for blue oyster, and today's date is August 10th. All right, guys, this beautiful thing. In about 4 to 5 weeks, these bags and containers will be sprouting some awesome oyster mushrooms for me to eat. You're going to want to space your bags at least a hand's length so that they don't overheat themselves, because the mycelium will actually give off a little heat if it's too close together. I'm looking forward to updating you guys on what these look like in a few weeks after they've been incubating. All right, so it's been 1 week since I inoculated some straw with blue oyster spawn, and I wanted to check in and show you the progress on the spawn run. I can see in some of these bags that you see the white growing across the straw pretty aggressively, and it's looking good. You know, it's a little warmer down here than I normally like it. It's hovering around that 75 to upper 70s when I'd rather it be 65 to 70 degrees. But it seems like so far the higher temperature is making things move a little faster. I'm guessing that within another week and a half, these things are really going to be far along and ready to go into the mushroom grow tent. Now I noticed when I lifted this, I saw a little mycelium fuzz popping out the bottom there. That's fine. It's not mold or anything, and it's my first time growing in a mason jar with this kind of top. And the reason I put this type of top on was just to let it drain. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna swap out this top with a little something different that allows less airflow, and then flip it over like this for now. The bags are looking pretty awesome. Seeing that spawn run. Looking good, looking good. And the container in the back, you don't really want to open it up and look inside of it. You just sort of want to trust the process. And eventually you'll see some little mushrooms trying to pin out of these holes. And that's what you're going to want to look for. And then once you start seeing some mushrooms pinning out of these holes, you'll know it's time to put them in the grow tent. That guy right there. As you can see now that I took the lid off of the mason jar, that fuzzy white mycelium growing across the straw. It looks great. It's doing its job. The straw is basically food for the mushroom mycelium. It's going to eat it up, and then once it's established and full on food, it's going to start to try to reproduce and grow some mushrooms. Okay, so I replaced the plastic sprouting lid with some plastic wrap, and I just set the plastic wrap in place by screwing a metal ring around it. And then I poked 2 holes in the plastic because you do have to let the mycelium breathe in this process, so it's going to need a little bit of air, but the sprouting lid I think was giving it too much air. Looking good. I'll update you guys on the process for my jar and the rest of my containers and bags in another week. So this will be week 2 of the spawn run since I inoculated my straw with blue oyster grain spawn. And things are moving pretty fast actually. And I think it has to do a lot with the warm weather. I'm noticing some pinning going on my container here, and that's a sign that these mushrooms are ready to go into the tent. Not seeing any pinning on the bags yet, but in the container I am. And I think I'm about ready to introduce this container to high humidity in my tent. Let's check out the mason jar here. Not seeing any pinning yet on the mason jar yet, or the bags, but this sign right here is definitely a sign that it's ready to go and start fruiting. Today I am going to introduce this guy to my mushroom tent, start giving it some high humidity. All right, looking good though. Only 2 weeks of incubation and one of my containers ready to go. I'm gonna give the bags a little more time and get these guys fruiting, hopefully have some mushrooms soon. Hey everyone, I want to share my mushroom grow tent build with you guys. Here's what we got. We got Metro rack, fits in there nicely so I can use the space really well. I got my humidity monitor right there. We got some rope lighting, LED rope lighting that I got from Home Depot. Keep it on the timer. Timer over here. Run it about 14 to 16 hours a day, something like that. The yellow hose is a hose I took off of my air pump, and I stuck it in my humidifier here, and I just wrapped some duct tape around it to make it fit in the hole. And this thing runs on low pretty much 24 hours a day and keeps it around between 80 and 90 degrees. It gets pretty humid in here. I'm still adjusting with it, with the fan. Pulls air out, and that's on this intermittent timer over here. All right, so it's been 24 hours since I introduced my containers to high humidity, and this cluster right here is really taking off. And I'm also seeing another small cluster forming right here on the side. This container is looking great. The bag right now isn't really doing anything since I introduced it to the high humidity, and that's fine. Just gonna leave it in here and let it keep going. But yeah, we're gonna keep a close eye on it, make sure that the humidity in this tent stays around 80 to 85. It'd be great. I've been running the timer a lot more frequently to keep it from getting too high down here, because this time of the year it just stays a little more humid in the tent, so I have to run the timer for my fan right here a lot more frequently. I'm running it right now about every 3 minutes for 60 seconds to suck the air. It's good. It's giving it a lot of nice airflow in here, and the humidity's staying where I want it. Looking good. That's how we grow mushrooms. I was checking out the mason jar, and right, see, there might be a little bit of pins starting to happen here. So I think I'm just gonna put the mason jar in and see what it wants to do. We always try to give our containers lots of space when it's in the tent, so they don't crowd themselves and overheat themselves. They give off a little bit of heat. The other bags that I made, I'm not seeing any pinning yet on them, so I'm just gonna keep them incubating out of the tent for now. Looks awesome. That mushroom right there, another 2 days, I'm gonna be eating that mushroom right there. Looking good. All right, so you can see my one cluster right here is looking great. And within a day, it'll be ready for harvest. It's been 48 hours since I introduced this to high humidity, and it only took 2 weeks since the inoculation before it started pinning and was introduced into the tent. So far, 2 weeks and 2 days since I inoculated the straw with the mushroom spawn. And here we go. Already got mushrooms in less than 3 weeks. The first bag that I put in the tent hasn't done anything, but I looked this morning, and this bag right here, pinning out of the zipper that I guess I didn't do tight enough, which is fine. These mushrooms are gonna find little holes to poke out of, and they're gonna grow out of whatever area they feel like growing out of. I've had them grow from underneath a cap before. They don't need a lot of space to start growing. It's so amazing. The mason jar, I'm starting to see some pinning underneath here where the holes are, and I expect to see mushrooms popping out of this mason jar by tomorrow. I'll update you guys on that as well. So we're just gonna close up this tent. Keep letting that humidity go. We want to make sure it stays around that 80% humidity in here, which can be difficult with my setup because I have to refill my humidifier at least once a day. So I'm going to keep an eye on that. When it's in this stage of pinning, it's important to make sure that the humidity doesn't drop down too low, because then the mushrooms will abort. We'll check in tomorrow when I'm ready to harvest this cluster right here and show you what else is growing. All right, guys, so I just opened up the tent to show you the progress and the third day since I introduced my first container to my mushroom tent with the high humidity. And this cluster is beautiful and ready to pick. You want to pick your mushroom clusters before the caps flatten out. And what a beautiful specimen. This guy over here is going to keep growing. Going to be another day or two before I pick this one. My mason jar is starting to pin on the top. These guys, in 2 days, they should be big enough to pick as well. And down here, these guys started fruiting out of the part of the Ziploc bag that I guess I didn't close all the way, which is fine. It can fruit wherever it wants. Looks good. I'm gonna give these another day and they'll be ready to pick tomorrow. When we harvest our mushrooms, just want to grab it by the base, give it a little twist, and it pops right off. So beautiful. All right, mushroom growers, got another quick update for you on my fruiting process. And I'm liking what I see here. I harvested yesterday a nice cluster from this container right here. And this cluster looks a little bit funky, but still good enough to eat. And we're gonna harvest this one today. This one was put in the tent at the same time as this on Monday, and it's now Friday, 4 days later. And we're starting to get some pinning coming out, looking good. Those mushrooms should be ready to eat in about 2 days from today. The mason jar is looking great. These mushrooms will probably be ready to pick by tomorrow. Down here, this bag, such a fun looking cluster coming out of where the Ziploc wasn't fully zipped, and they look great. We're gonna pick this right now as well. Also seeing some pinning coming out of this bag right here in the back. Things are looking great in the tent, guys. Oop. Let's pick that off right now, actually. All right. Some more beautiful mushrooms to cook up for me and my family. All right, guys, I wanted to give you one last update from the grow tent. My mason jar is looking great. Ready to pick these right now. Also got another nice cluster forming on one of the Ziploc bags up above. That'll be ready to go. I could pick it today or maybe let it go till tomorrow. And this cluster as well. I'll let this go until tomorrow. Now, after you pick your mushrooms from your containers, they're probably going to want to rest. My mushroom growing teacher, he used to tell me that it's like having a baby. They put all their energy into fruiting, and then they're going to need a little time to rest before they give it another go. So we'll just leave them in the tent, keep the humidity steady at 80%, and within a week or two, you'll start to see some more pinning and some more clusters popping up. And I usually leave them in the tent for like a month. I've even left them up to 2 months, but you're better off just making some new fresh ones at that point. And then you just want to rotate them out. Take the old bags and compost them, or even throw them in a big pile of straw in the backyard and see what happens. That's always something fun to try to do. I've had more mushrooms grow off these when I throw them outside. About to start another batch, get the process going again, and always have some fresh bags in the tent providing me some awesome mushrooms. When storing my mushrooms, I like to store them in a container like this, and I just loosely cover it with a little bit of aluminum foil, and I put some holes in it so it can get a little bit of airflow. You don't want to store these in an airtight container because the mushrooms need to breathe. All right, guys, well, I'm about to close up the tent so the humidity can get back to where I need it to be so the rest of these mushrooms can keep growing. If you ever have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'd love to hear from you guys. If you like these videos and you want to see me grow more food, whether it's in my basement grow room, my garden out in the backyard, and how I like to prepare this food, subscribe to my channel. All right, guys, have a great day and stay healthy.